has authority and control over. According to the codes, the Bureau of Street Services only has control and authority over two parts of the urban forest. That would be the street tree population, those trees that most people see adjacent to the curb, in between the sidewalk and the curb, or in tree wells, called street trees. Approximately 700,000 trees exist in that environment, as well as the other approximately 1.2 million trees that reside in areas of public parks, city parks, and in facilities where the city has control and authority over those trees. That is a subset, those 700,000 street trees and approximately 1 million to 1.2 million trees contained in the city's facilities and parks is a subset of an approximate 10 million tree population in the city's urban forest as a whole. The number of trees in the city's urban forest came from an assessment done in 2006 by UC Davis. They did that with aerial spectrography and other methods of sampling to determine the number of trees. In that number, they actually did not include the native tree population in the city. That would be your oaks and your sycamores and a few other species. Those trees were not included as the assessment. Most of those trees in their native environment grow in the mountainous region, the San Gabriels, the Verdugos, the Santa Susanas, and the Santa Monica mountain areas. That's where those trees grow. So the other subset of that whole urban forest that the Bureau of Street Services has authority over are the protected trees. It used to be called the Oak Tree Ordinance prior to 2006 when we amended the ordinance to include a few more species. So the Bureau of Street Services actually is responding in this motion to those parts of the urban forest over which we have control. It was a much broader motion, and we're more than happy to work with others, with the community, with scientists, with entomologists as we move forward to come up with a plan for the broader urban forest. But for the time being, I can only address those trees that are contained either in the street tree population or the native tree population. We know that there are a few very big challenges confronting us with the street tree population as well as the urban forest in general. I think the most talked about is the drought. Actually, the drought came after a couple of the other big problems that the urban forest is having, and those are pests. One of those is called Xylella fastidiosa, which is a fungus, and the other one is a fungus.
Can you spell that, please? I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry, what?
Can you spell that, please? Just kidding.
I can.
That's
it's like
spelling.
It's commonly called Oleander Scorch. It actually started attacking oleanders about 10 years ago. And many of the oleanders in parts of the city, county, and Southern California area have died from this disease. And the other one is vectored, it's a fungus as well, by an insect called the shot-hole borer. It's not affecting quite as many trees as the Xylella is, at least in our experience. The Xylella is attacking many of our largest tree species, the trees that get the largest, and also coincidentally happen to be some of the largest numbers in the street tree population. In the report, if you're looking at the report, I've named a few of those species. American sweet gum and mulberry are the two species that we see being impacted the most by this problem. They are beginning to actually, we are having death from these problems. We are having a lot of tree decline in these species. Now the drought with either one of these other problems intensifies the problems, and it's not just arithmetic, it's more exponential. So when you have a disease like Xylella and you add drought on top of it, it's not just twice as bad, it's 3 or 4 times as bad. And the effect really starts to multiply very quickly. Now, as far as the street tree population and drought, we haven't done an empirical study, we haven't had time yet to do that. But anecdotally, here's what the Bureau sees as far as the impact goes on the street tree population. Because most of the street trees are still contained in areas where they're receiving irrigation, or had until very recently with the mayor and the governor's edicts regarding water use. We're still receiving water, in effect rain, by irrigation, up until just 5 or 6 months ago. So for the street tree population, we don't see something directly attributable to the drought. But we do see it causing more problems with trees with other diseases. Like if it has Xylella, the drought's basically eliminating some of those trees. But we haven't seen, and I would direct you to look downtown at much of the ficus population. You will not see a lot of trees. When trees get drought stressed, the canopy thins, the leaves start to lose color, many other things can happen too. But you'll see a lot of the ficus down here really aren't exhibiting those symptoms. So as of right now, we don't really see something we could say it's the drought on the street trees. But we know this, the drought will impact trees if it continues, especially if we include the turf conversion plans with the DWP that have people removing turf, replacing with either drought tolerant or xeriscape or no landscaping, just putting a ground cover out there, that if we have both of those together, again, the trees are going to show an impact. But as of right now, we don't have a lot of empirical data that shows us that street trees are being impacted directly by drought, but it's certainly impacting them if they're already stressed. The native population, unfortunately, because it's mostly on private property, we don't have a lot of data. But from what we've seen from other organizations like Recreation and Parks, they have attributed the death of 14,000 trees approximately in their parks, mostly in unirrigated areas, Griffith Park, edges of golf courses and places like that where they don't have irrigation. They've seen trees die. If you drive down freeways, you're seeing the effects of drought. Caltrans stopped a lot of their watering several years ago. You're beginning to see trees die from the lack of water.
So knowing the fact that we've experienced a drought in recent years and the fact that we haven't had any rain, we're anticipating a strong El Nino season.
You are?
That poses some problems.
It certainly does.
How are we preparing for that?
Preparing for El Nino?
Right, in response to knowing that we have trees that haven't been watered, we've been suffering from a drought, and putting two and two together, I mean, there can be some potential challenges moving forward, especially this
Okay, and I
rainy
think this
season.
addresses the young lady who was here before me
Right.
talking about stormwater and capturing rainwater. We work with our sister bureau, the Bureau of Sanitation, who is actually the group that has the control over that part of the system, the stormwater system. As far as street trees go, all we can do basically at the Bureau of Street Services is encourage people to capture as much water as they can on their own properties, to not divert it out to the streets into the stormwater system. And the Bureau of Sanitation has a very proactive plan in place to do this, and that's their job, and they're doing a good job of it. So they have a very proactive base of getting people to understand this. Rain barrels and things like that they're also putting out there too. But the Bureau of Street Services, as far as street trees specifically goes, like I said, first of all, we don't have any ability to really control that too much, the Bureau of Street Services. With Bureau of Sanitation's plan, we think it's a great plan, and it's going to really help by keeping water on properties. Now, as far as trees that have died or the impact of an El Nino on trees, dead trees aren't necessarily unsafe trees. And let me qualify that real quickly. Oftentimes, rain and wind, especially rain, on heavily canopied trees causes problems because we have tree failure. And we know with the fact that we haven't been able to proactively maintain trees over the since the crash, we haven't been able to proactively trim trees up as we would like to in this city. So that certainly could be problematic as we move forward. To be honest with you, since we haven't had rain for so long, nor have we had windstorms for so long, we're not really sure how that's going to work together. But I will say this, without rain, we haven't seen quite as much growth in many trees. So there's a good side and a bad side to both of these problems. Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I used to be in the commission. Yes, Council Member.
Press a button.
I want to follow up on Mr. Buscaino's question. So it takes now, when we call the Urban Forestry Department, it takes an average of 3 weeks to get out to an emergency call to remove a fallen tree. With El Nino, how are you preparing to address some of these calls? I mean, it takes an average of 3 weeks to, I would say, 6 to actually come out to an emergency, a tree that's fallen in my district. So how are you prepared to address this during El Nino?
That's a great question. First of all, the first thing we have to do when we get an emergency call is what we call the first response. We have to get out there and make the street passable, and we do that. It's the recovery that you're referring to, that it can sit out there for weeks at a time.
Sure. I mean, I have a number of dead trees in my district, and those are not going to get removed anytime soon. But in an event, in an emergency, and they fall, it takes an average of 3 to 6 weeks to respond to that. So how are you going to address that during this storm coming up?
Here's what we're doing. First of all, we have an El Nino emergency plan at the Bureau. Mm-hmm. In the event that trees we could have several different scenarios. We could have trees being the number one problem in a rainstorm. We could have mudslides being the number one problem. Probably in the early storms, the trees are going to be the number one problem before ground is saturated. So what we will do is we're going to divert all resources in the Bureau to the first response and recovery of tree emergencies as we move forward in the El Nino season. Will that, and I will say this, council member, that within the last month, we've made huge strides in our recovery. We have actually changed the way we are doing things. I can provide you a detailed plan. If you would like to have that, I will be happy to do that. We've reordered the way we attack problems like that. And right now in the valley, we're responding within 7 to 10 days for recovery. Now that's a big change because you're right. It was 3 to 6 weeks. I totally agree. But we've actually restructured the way we're doing things. We're using our resources much more efficiently. We're looking at things a lot more, and that's in response to the mayor's transparency models and using metrics to be able to know what we're doing and know how we have to improve.
If we call your office now, it takes an average of 7 days to recover a fallen tree.
7 to 10 days to get to get to the pickup. Yes.
And what is the plan during El Nino? So now you've changed your model, and it takes about 7 days to remove a fallen tree. How many days will it take to remove a fallen tree during the storm?
Well, that will depend on a couple things. First of all, we're not using the whole department the whole Bureau at this time. So we've made the changes at Urban Forestry to attack that. Secondly, that will depend on volume of calls. I'll give you an example. In 1996, there was a windstorm. There were 7,000 or more. We lost track. 7,000 calls for tree emergencies in 3 days. And it took months to catch up. If we have that type of an influx, I really couldn't answer the question. But if we have things come in moderate dosages, I would say that we will be able to stay ahead of the recovery of those that are impacting main thoroughfares, around schools, hospitals, et cetera, The ones that don't impact those high-stress areas, we will then prioritize as we need to. Yes, sir.
So just to piggyback on Ms. Martinez's question, do we have enough in-house staff to be prepared to respond to these types of emergencies when the projected El Nino hits?
If it doesn't get too out of hand, the Bureau will be able to stay up with it. If it gets completely out of hand, we probably wouldn't. And there's been some discussion about on-demand contracts. We are looking into that, and anybody that ever comes and sits in this room knows that the contracting process for the city is a little bit cumbersome still. We are working on that. We're also working on a multiple-year contract plan that doesn't annually perform contracts. We're going to have multiple-year contracts, so we don't have to keep coming back and asking for permission. We still have to get funded every year, but we'll have the contracts ready to go. If we get funding, we can move forward.
Right.
We are addressing an on-call contract.
I believe we'll address that, some funding pieces on item 18. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ron. Back to the Xylella fastidiosa for a second.
Very good.
Say that again.
Thank you. So,
Backwards.
I have a cheat sheet right here. I could spell it out. So, a question for you. Are the native trees as susceptible as the non-native trees to that disease?
In my experience, I haven't kept up on the research constantly, but from my base of knowledge at this point, it doesn't seem like fastidiosa is attacking natives, but shot-hole borer is. Shot-hole borer is attacking a lot of the native tree species, so there's no trees that are escaping the problems here.
Right, okay. And so we're planting I'm planting another, I think, 70 flowering pear trees in Glassell Park. I already planted 70, and we're planting about double. How susceptible are they? So where I'm going is I want to make sure that we start thinking in terms of the types of trees that we're planting to grow our urban canopy, and how the susceptibility of these diseases informs that.
That's a great question. And again, every day the list keeps growing for the species affected, especially by the Xylella. I would have to get back to you exactly if that tree, I hadn't seen it on any list recently, but it could be. So yes, you're exactly right. We need to be planting species that aren't affected by the diseases and infestations that we possibly could have. And unfortunately, the list keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. That's not affected by drought, not affected by Xylella, not affected by the shot-hole borer and other problems that we have. So it's going to be a huge challenge for us as we move forward. And as indicated in the report, the Bureau was we're requesting that you direct us to create a state of the street trees report, which is being done as we speak.
Right, right.
And then in response to that, the Bureau will be working with the Mayor's office to come up with a plan that's sustainable for the, not just street trees and protected trees, but the urban forest on a whole.
Okay, great. I might have a few more questions, but I'll wait until the presentation's over.
Mr. Rue?
Just wanted to go back to Councilwoman Martinez's question, and thank you so much. It was a couple of weeks ago when you and all the other departments, LAFD, LAPD, Emergency Management, came together to give us a El Nino preparation
Yes, sir.
presentation, and I mean, I was very much, it felt good that you guys were preparing for a long time. And at that presentation, I know you said that you guys are reorganizing your department so you could have a more faster response during El Nino, and thank you for that. And our office has been working closely with yours and really appreciate all the work you're doing. And I offered it back then, and I know we're probably going to get a follow-up report later, but if there's anything that we could do, my office or any of the other offices regarding, the chair asked about, do you have enough staff? Any administrative impediments, anything that, you could think of that we could prepare in advance to prepare for El Nino. Hopefully it won't be a bad one, and you'll have enough capacity to respond to everything. But in a bad case scenario, whatever we could do to assist for you to prepare, let us know.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Mr. O'Farrell? You're,
Unless you have questions?
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the report's pending, and I don't want to assume, but it's going to be in concert with our whole sidewalk repair replacement program in advance of, so that, it's really important that we do all we can to protect the tree canopy that we have, and then in terms of as we put the sidewalk replacement plan together, that's really important. So you're shaking your head, so I think that's accurate to say.
Absolutely.
And then in terms of the mapping that you're doing, I mean, no one in my experience is as experienced in terms of the city street trees as you are, and so I think you're a great resource here, and even the anecdotal information you offer is really accurate, or it resonates with me in terms of the neighborhoods that I represent. Will we be able to hone in a little more and create an actual database? That's a large task because of the tens of thousands of street trees we have, but to get a more clear and clinical picture.
Yes, sir. Another great question. We are leveraging the sidewalk repair program to be able to allow us to begin recollecting the street tree data through an inventory. If you don't know this, we did an inventory back in 1996, and there's, for most part, that information is still relatively pertinent because trees don't move. So if they weren't removed for some reason, then the trees we collected in 1996 are still where we said that they are. What wasn't robust about that system is it was pre the GIS technology we have now and all these other ways that we can do things. So as we go forward now in the sidewalk program, we're going to be recollecting a whole inventory again, the whole 700,000 or approximately 700,000 street trees. This is going to take some time. Yeah. We're doing it as we move forward with the sidewalk repair program. The intention right now, because of resources, is to use the resources that have to be expended for the sidewalk program to collect data as we do that. So they're going to be collecting at the Bureau of Engineering sidewalk data, and we're going to be at the same time collecting tree data relative to those sites, and then expanding as we go in the future with using that same model. So we're excited about it because it's using a lot of the really current technology. And also, and this is back to, if I may, back to Councilmember Martinez's question, one of the things that we've done is we're utilizing technology now. Even 6 months ago, we did everything by paper. So we had to hand paper from one person to another, go out in the field, write it down. We did collect it in computer systems, but that had to be done manually. From paper to the field, back to the home base, back to the computer, over and over and over again. This alone took forever. So as we move forward in the sidewalk repair program, we're actually getting ready in the very near future, and I mean the near future, in the next couple of weeks, to actually be able to take tablets out in the field and be able to input directly into our systems And you know with the new customer relations management system, which is called the MyLA 311 system, that's going to allow us, along with the technology of mobile technology, to really be able to expand. And we also recently we're going to be coming before council to approve a committee motion last week relative to using a mobile platform to fund us a little bit to move forward on that as well. So we are excited about those things.
That's terrific. We're actually going to save some trees by using less paper, which is...
That's correct.
We're coming full
That's
circle.
correct.
here.
Enough with the
Perfect.
paper.
Ms. Martinez, you good?
I just have one last question. So how is this motion going to affect the current ordinance that we just approved in council? The 2-to-1 street tree?
And if it's protected, it's
Replacement?
4-to-1.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's protected,
There's
it's
two
4-to-1.
things. Another good question. Let's talk. We have to talk about them separately. Street trees and protected trees. This body that sits in this room normally adopted back on June 17th, a policy relative to street tree permitting removal and replacement. In essence, what they said is that every street tree that gets removed has to be replaced on a 2-for-1 basis with 24-inch box-size tree stock. That's the size of the container. It's a tree about 1.5 inches in diameter by about 6 feet tall. And water it for 3 years. That was the big change. The other things that were in the motion had to do with hearing things at board, and those really didn't change much. It codified longstanding practices for that. So again, it's 2-to-1 on street tree replacement, 24-inch box, water for 3 years. Now, protected trees are completely separate. They're codified in a different part of the code. They're codified in the Department of Public Works, Public Safety, Section 46, as well as the Department of City Planning in Section 12. And it addresses only those 3 species and 1 genus of trees that's protected that are native trees in this region. That law, both those laws, say that it's a minimum 2-for-1, 15-gallon tree replacement stock. The body that normally sits in this room, the Board of Public Works, in a policy decision approximately 3 or 4 years ago now, time flies, I don't really remember when it was, changed that to 4-to-1. So for protected trees, it's a 4-to-1 tree replacement. But what the Bureau has always tried to do is to replace and this is in the code, what you're really trying to do is replace the value of what you lost. So oftentimes the replacement for protected trees is much higher because we're trying to replace what we lost, not just a numbers game. And so we try to do it that way. But in a nutshell, that's it.
Thank you.
Any others? We good? Okay, so responding to this motion before us, colleagues, what we'll do is direct the Bureau of Street Services to develop and publish a State of the Street Trees report, which I know, Ron, you indicated you're already working on.
Yes, sir.
And also direct Bureau of Street Services to develop a street tree sustainability plan. How soon do you think, once we approve this, you'll have these reports before us?
One is dependent upon the other. The second, the sustainability plan, is dependent on us completing the State of the Street Trees report, which will be completed by the end of this calendar year, not fiscal year, calendar year.
Okay.
The sustainability plan is a much bigger document. The State of the Street Trees is going to try to nail down a condition assessment of what we have on the street trees today. Okay. It's not talking about remedies or anything else. Just say, what is the condition today? And then the sustainability plan will address how do we change that? How do we move that where we need to go? That, I wouldn't begin at this point to put a calendar date on that yet.
Okay.
But we'll begin. We're already working with the mayor's department on this, and we will continue to do so.
Very good, Ron. Thank you so much. Well, just like our streets, we've graded our streets. We know that a third of our streets are in failed condition. It'd be good to know and be educated on the state of our street trees so that we can properly plan both on crews to address it and also be more fiscally responsible how we address the tree situation in our city. So with that objection, we will approve this item before us, item number 16. I send that to council. Thank you. Item number 17, Can you please read that into the record?
Item 17, motion Buscaino O'Farrell instructing the CAO, with the assistance of the CLA, the Department of Public Works, and the City Attorney, to undertake a comprehensive review of city street tree issues and concerns, including but not limited to motions currently pending before the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee.
So I'll invite, again, Jenny Binstock on this item.
Thank you very much. Hello again. A lot of what we were hoping to address was already talked about, so thank you, and thank you for the very strong language in this motion that was recently introduced. I'm glad that both El Nino and also the pending sidewalk settlement were both brought up, because one of the important points we wanted to reinforce here, of course, was that we should be looking at all opportunities where infrastructure needs intersect in light of all of this tremendous work that's being done to identify where the problem areas are within our city and to map our trees and collect all of this tremendous data that should be available, more readily available to us. So that's one thing. And then the other comment I just wanted to make in light of all of this mapping also that's happening, understanding, you know, how do we best articulate the value of trees given all of the multi-benefits they provide, and ensuring that that value is well articulated within any policy moving forward. And I'm out of time, so that's all I want to say, and we would love to work with you on that as well and hope to be a part.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Anyone here from the CAO's office? Stacy or David? Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Stacy Sosa, CAO.
Good afternoon. So we've been talking about looking at a comprehensive review of our city street tree issues and concerns, looking at the quality of work from our city crews compared to contractors. We're also looking at multi-year contractors that are pre-qualified and those who are on-call contractors to make sure that we address those issues that Ms. Martinez mentioned earlier, that we get out quickly and swiftly in response to our residents' concerns and down trees. Can you share with us some of the advantages of using in-house tree trimming forces versus using contract forces?
Sure. So there are several report backs that have been requested, and we're currently working on those with assistance from street services. But one of the advantages to city forces versus contracting out is typically flexibility to deploy your resources without having to take time to do contract amendments, and also flexibility to deploy them during emergency situations, for example, to divert their activities from maybe proactive tree trimming to respond to down trees during a storm event. So that's one of the advantages. So we're going to look at that, and we'll see what other advantages you find with city forces, and then also, you know, there are advantages to contracting out as well, and we'll be reporting back on those in our report.
Very good. And then also, I'm hoping that the report will also indicate the proprietary departments who took a number of our city crews that worked for urban forestry. Can the council require these proprietary departments to mobilize and come back to the city when we need that help?
So that's one of the issues that we'll be looking at in our report. We haven't started on that issue particularly just yet. In the past, I think that has been an issue that's been looked at, but we hope to have more for you on that issue soon.
Okay. Questions, colleagues? Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As part of this report, I would love for you to include the following. For a number of years now, Bureau of Street Lighting has not had the authority to go out and trim a tree that's blocking a street lamp. It gets in the hopper with all other requests for tree trimming, and oftentimes it's, you know, a long, long time before a tree can get trimmed that's blocking a street lamp. I would love to return the ability to Bureau of Street Lighting to trim trees that are blocking street lights, and not take away that ability through Bureau of Street Services, but give that ability to Bureau of Street Lighting, because we have requests pending and they just aren't getting done. because they're waiting in line. And this is a public safety issue, usually. Not always, but usually. There's one on the street where I live, for example. It's not going to get trimmed anytime soon. It's completely blocking a street light. So that's just, I think a logical sort of step is that when we get these types of requests, and sometimes they're from the police department, that Bureau of Street Lighting could actually just go out themselves and remove the blocked street light. So that's one of the recommendations I'd like to see in the report.
This is something we could look at. It sounds like it may be a coordination issue.
Yeah, but it always has been, and it's just not getting coordinated. So I think that coordination is non-existent, and I'm not blaming anyone, because there are thousands of requests to Bureau of Street Services to trim trees. I just think it would help. I'm sure that Bureau of Street Lighting gets these cases on a regular basis, and I would like the coordination to be sort of reverse of what it is now. Have BSL just go out and trim the tree and then let Bureau of Street Services know that they got this particular request because it was blocking a light.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Martinez?
I got a sort of kind of different example of that. Police and community have asked both if there is an opportunity for street lighting to trim back trees, particularly in the neighborhoods where we have a lot of our children that are being sex trafficked, especially in my district. So a lot of the Johns that pick up, these pedophiles that pick up these kids, they like to look for dark areas. And so a lot of the times you have these overgrown trees that are blocking us, that are completely making it impossible for the light to shine on their cars. It would make so much more sense if our street lighting folks would be able to trim back that tree and make it more difficult for adults to find, dark places to have illicit activities with children, but it would help. And it's a common sense approach to trying to prevent these neighborhoods from being inundated by folks.
Stacey, if I can bring up
in and out of
Ron.
my area, but
Can I bring up Ron, if I may?
we've tried all kinds of things, including calling the department, and like I said, it takes weeks before we can even get a call back.
I understand. Isn't it when there's a public safety concern, that's one of the priorities from the department to mobilize your teams?
The public safety issues as far as trees go is the street light issue, in all honesty, as far as the tree part of it is somewhere down the list of priorities. But just so that you understand the way that street lighting contracts are allocated, the street lighting contracts are part of the 218 process. When they put in street lights in a neighborhood, the community votes in the 218 process to allow their lights to be maintained. The street lighting assessment districts are what gets pruned by most of the street lighting contract money. So there may be a block with, say, 10 houses on it, but there's only 3 street lights. But they all pay money to have the trees trimmed. So to allow fairly equitable distribution of monies to the people who pay, generally speaking, the contracts that are performed by street services or overseen by street services that are done by contractors are equally distributed amongst the entire district where people pay funds to maintain the streetlights. The Street Lighting Bureau and we work together to make sure that can happen. They keep a small amount of funds that they contract for specific streetlights. So I'd be happy to get with the Street Lighting Bureau and maybe see exactly where they are. I'm not exactly sure how much money they're keeping, and we could maybe work out something that's equitable for all. But it's kind of a delicate balance between going out and having a block that has everybody paying, but you go out and you only trim a tree in front of Mr. Smith's house and Mrs. Jones' house, but you don't trim at the other people's homes as well, who all pay for the maintenance of that streetlight system. So that's just a real quick background on how we've done this. We could certainly look at modifying that, but that's historically been how we have done it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rue.
Yeah, I just want to echo my colleagues' comments, and in that study, and I'd love to see the report back, whether it's collaboration or better coordination, but if you could also include, trees, overgrown trees, for stop signs and street signs.
Yeah, so that's a priority.
That's a different issue.
Yeah. That's a priority.
That's a different issue. Street lights and stop signs. Call MyLA 311. It's an emergency.
Right.
That is an emergency. The
And if
street lights systems is not.
Yeah, and if I could also add, in my office, we've had very positive experiences with. I don't want it to be like we're just bashing you today,
Oh,
but
you're not. No, don't feel
you're
bad.
because we do understand that you have a lack of staff and you're going through trying to make using technology and trying to do everything you can to make it more efficient. But yeah, we've had lots of positive experiences with your office where you've been very responsive. So very much appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Rue.
I will say this about stoplights and stop signs and street signals. It's an emergency. We have a commitment to being out there to respond in one business day. So if that's not happening, you need to call me and tell me, because it is sent out to our emergency units as an emergency to be pruned the same day or the next. It may have to be the next day.
What about street signs?
No, that's
a
I'm
lower
talking
part,
about
right?
traffic control. Stop signs and street signals are an emergency, and they go out as an emergency, which is different than any other type of request. So for your offices and your constituents, call MyLA 311. When it gets put in the system, we respond. It gets sent right straight to an emergency unit.
I just want to,
Mr. O'Farrell.
I just want to add on, just so if it's a resource issue between the two bureaus, street lighting or Bureau of Street Trees, then let's talk about what resources BSL is going to need so that they can go out and trim trees around lights as well. Because even though it may not be an urgent issue or an urgent need, it is
It's a
fostering,
safety issue. I agree.
criminal activity clearly.
I believe they use contractors. Their forces don't trim trees. They're electricians. So they're not out there trimming trees. They may do a very small amount of trimming, but they contract it. They contract out to a contractor.
And the impression I gather is that the requests they have are, exponentially fewer than the general tree trimming requests
Totally
that we have on our streets. So I bet we can strike the right kind of balance so that they can go out and surgically trim the trees that are chronic, and they're seeing the requests to take care of, the trees that Ms. Martinez mentioned. I think that we could strike the right balance.
Sure.
I have no doubt about that. I think they just need the resources to be more proactive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your report. We'll approve this item without objection and move that forward. Looking forward to the report back. Thank you. Here, our final item, item number 18.
Mr. Bruscaino, before moving on, did you want to add the additional request for information along with the approval of the motion on 17?
Yes, thank you for catching
Thank you.
that. We'll approve that item as amended.
Item 18, Bureau of Street Tree Services report. Should be street services relative to transferring budgeted funds in the total amount of $6.5 million for contract tree trimming supervision, and staff overtime for on-demand tree trimming.
Mr. Lorenzen, it's a busy day for you. We're talking trees here, Public Works.
That's
It's a tree day.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I want to invite back Jenny Benstock, I'm sorry, Ron, for her speaker card that she filled out.
Thank you.
Welcome again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you again. It's my last time. Sorry to hog. So just two quick comments on this one on behalf of tree people. So the first, we think it's great that there's funding for the supervision of contracted crews, because this ensures adequate supervision, and the best work possible is, of course, being done. And this prevents, obviously, public outcry over poor workmanship, which has been an issue in the past. And so we are very supportive of that, and also supportive of any proactive practices for in-house tree trimming that can be done in advance of large events in conjunction with other big projects, because this makes sure that the most visible trees appear in alignment with urban forestry best practices. Okay, thank you very
so
much again.
for your input. So looks like we're from the UB advancing $2.5 million of the 6.5 that was allocated this budget cycle. And my question on the $500,000 for staff to oversee the contractors.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't specifically say how many number of positions that have been requested and or classifications. Can you clarify that, please?
I certainly can. This is actually a carryover from fiscal 14-15.
14-15, right.
When the same thing occurred, and we've actually mentioned that in this report. It's 6 supervisors. It's a tree surgeon supervisor. It's 6 positions. which we are still doing, as we don't have very many contracts going at this point. But when we do have all of the contracts going, we use...
Do supervisors do the work?
No, they
I mean,
supervise.
they just supervise.
Tree surgeon supervisors oversee the contracts. They do not supervise contracts. They are the contract administrator on site for those contracts to
Got it.
ensure that they're following specs.
Got it. Because
We do not
we've often
supervise.
hear concerns and complaints that the contractors butcher these trees. So you're saying you have,
It does still
you
happen.
bring in
and that's-
6 supervisors to oversee the contractors.
They oversee the contractor and ensure, the plan is that every contractor has an inspector, the supervisor, on site every day. That actually happened at the end of last fiscal. Right now, because we're in between the contracts, we have some running, but not too many right now in between contracts. And as we go into the fiscal year and the contracts start getting let from this board, then there'll be an inspector, this tree surgeon supervisor on site with the contractor every day.
Got it.
Just like it did yesterday. And that came forth from your committee from a couple of years ago.
Right.
That we did that. So yes, and the other, it is 2.5. I think that Mr. White said 25 million. It's 2.5 million. 0.5
John,
million.
don't shortchange us here.
You
I mean,
can give
we're
us
looking-
25. 0.5 million
Can you imagine?
is for those supervisory staff to oversee contracts. 0.5, which was done last year, was distributed equally among all 15 council districts to the amount of $33,333.33.
That's the on-demand based program.
That's an on-demand type program where
Per
we work
council
with,
district.
where we worked with your offices, all of your offices, to supply us, working with us, to do locations that are those chronic people that always call us. And we are asking that we get that again so we can have that program. Now, the additional 1.5, originally at a year ago, April, so back in April of 14, when we first started thinking about this, the intention was to have that allocated in July, this July, so it was April 15th, so we could start hiring people to supplement, as Jenny has said, with city forces. So we could hire another crew or two to be doing in-house tree trimming. But because it was in the UB and we're already into November, we don't think it's possible to move those gears fast enough to get people hired on this year. So we're requesting that 1.5 be used for contracts so we can start to lower that tree trimming cycle down to a number that's a little bit more less unwieldy.
How long would it take you to hire the 6 soups?
Yeah, if we got let's go to next fiscal year. If we go to the next budget and we're ready on July 1st to get it, we can probably get those people on in 6 to 8 months. But it'll take at least 6 to 8 months, and we won't be able to do that.
I'm sorry, I may not be understanding you. So the $500,000 we're hiring today, after
The 500,000, we already have, the 6 supervisors are already here.
already here.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
Okay, the
Thanks for
$500,000
clarifying
for
that.
on-demand
They're already
trimming,
on the ground, they're
They're on the
present,
ground, yes.
and they are
Kept those.
supervising contractors.
That is correct.
Okay.
The $500,000 for on-demand, we do on weekends. So we use existing forces and the small amount of forces and work on the
Okay.
weekends to do that.
Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, how many trees does this cover per council district?
With the $33,333, that's 5.
Trees, 5 trees?
Okay, let's use that. That's 5 per thousand. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 trees. So if you give us 150 gigantic trees, you won't get 150 trees. But I'm using basically a standard unit of trimming, which, to give you an idea, if you look at the average size of ficus down here, that's about size tree, or is basically a standard unit to trim. So somewhere in that neighborhood of 150 trees.
Yes, Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ron, this is the Ron Lorenzen show today, but it's a good show, so thank you. It's always an education. A question for you. What is now the latest calculation based on existing resources for when trees will get trimmed? How many years?
You mean the tree trimming cycle? That's a snapshot in time. That's the 700,000 population divided by the amount of money that's funded this year and the amount of trees we trim. This year, it'll probably be somewhere around 17 years.
Around 17 years, which is a vast improvement from the Great Recession era, where it was like I don't know what it was, 150, every 150 years at that.
The highest I think it was actually, I think, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 50.
Oh, just 45 to
Just
50 years.
45 to 50.
But that was the calculation. But at least the calculation has come down to 17.
That is
As we
because of
search
the
for more
concerted efforts
resources.
between the mayor's office and the council office to get it down to this. BMP, best management practice, 5 to 7.
Terrific.
That's the BMP.
Thank you.
Let me share with you a story. I had an irate resident who took it upon herself to trim her tree and paid herself, pulled the permit, paid the tree to trim the tree, a street tree. And then weeks later, the city crews came in and trimmed the rest of the block. How do we avoid that?
That's a good question and a difficult one because the permitting system is back when Mayor Hahn was still mayor, we were having many of these same issues, and they asked us to streamline the process for permitting. The tree trimming permit system now works like this. You put in the request, you get the permit.
On site.
Okay? So our systems aren't robust enough yet. As we move forward here in the near future, as the CRM works better and MyLA 311 works better, we'll be able to then juxtapose things like that. But in the past, they were separate systems. So you would get a permit and the other side of the house wouldn't even know about it. So to answer your question, with the CRM now, it's an automated system. Everything goes through that system.
Got it.
We'll be able to juxtapose it better.
Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? Thanks so much, Ron, for your
You're welcome.
comprehensive
Thank you.
report today. And we'll approve. The CAO have any instructions on this specific item? Stacey, you have any detailed fund transfers that you need to put on record?
Yes, Stacey is the CAO. So we did go ahead and prepare the controller's instructions, and I believe you may have copies of this. And so basically it's that the council, subject to the approval of the mayor, authorized the controller to transfer $2.5 million from the unappropriated balance, fund number 158, account 5080185, tree trimming services, and to appropriate to the Bureau of Street Services, Fund 186, to the salaries, general overtime, and contractual services accounts.
Very good. Also, authorize CAO to make technical corrections as necessary to those transactions included in the report.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. So without objection, we'll approve item 18 as amended. Without objection, we'll send that. That was our final item. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and thanks for joining us.